So there are lots of tools to think about describing descriptive statistics and describing your data through descriptive statistics. And we're going to look at those tools. And remember, in the fourth round of these videos, we're going to look at how to write that up. So if I asked you to go describe some people, you know how to do that. You can look at people's characteristics and you can decide, are they short, tall, broad, narrow? Do they come from around here? Do they not? Those kinds of questions. And so we do the same thing in statistics. I think one of the things is the mathematicians have made this more obscure than it really needs to be. And so what I want to do is I want to kind of tone this down a little bit. So the two things I'm really interested in this, and we'll talk more about this, but I want to know where the middle of the data set is, and I want to know kind of the extent, the spread around the middle of the data. And I've used a map here to kind of demonstrate that. So I've got a middle point right there. There's my middle. And then I've got kind of this circle that indicates, well, this is the spread. This is where most of them is. And actually, this is actually a spatial statistical piece. If you took 670, you actually did this. The dot in the middle is the mean center, and the spread is the first standard distance. But we're not going to do that in this class. We're going to deal with traditional statistics. But that gives you a sense about that. So when we do this, I really want to emphasize this, that there are formulas for all of this, and we could do this by hand. But to be honest with you, that most of these things I have not done by hand since the 1980s, and I see no reason to make you do that, particularly because the concepts are actually pretty basic and pretty simple. But again, mathematicians have obscured this in formulas that look awful. And so what I want to do is kind of demystify some of this for you. The measures that we want to start with are measures of the middle, right? And if I said to you, where is the middle of the data set? You could probably eyeball it in some respects. I mean, if the data set's small enough, you can usually eyeball the middle. And what I want you to think about is, okay, middle could mean a lot of different things, all right? There's not one middle even. And so when you describe the middle, you provide a couple different descriptions of this. And so the first one is the mean. And I have the formula here. And actually, you've probably calculated means in the past, where you add all the values together and you divide by the number of values you have. That's actually the arithmetic mean. And we want to use this a lot. And the mean is an important measure of the middle, but it's only one measure of the middle. And so I want to make sure that you know that. And so I'm always going to ask you for the mean, which is the arithmetic average. I'm also going to ask you for the median, which is the actual middle point of the value. If you have 100 values, the 51st value is the middle value. And the way it goes is that you have n plus 1 divided by 2. So that would be the middle. There's the mid-range, which I'm not going to ask you about. There's a trimmed mean, which SPSS does pull out. It pulls out 5% off the top and the bottom, just so that you begin to kind of have a closer mean. And the reason we do this is because the mean is deeply affected by outliers, right? And so my PhD is in geography, and so the University of North Carolina put out for years statistics on the average salary of a geographer coming out of the University of North Carolina was $600,000-$700,000 a year. They stopped doing it after a while, but it was kind of a joke in the university. So as well as a lot of other places. Well, the thing is that one of the geography majors from the University of North Carolina happens to be Michael Jordan, and so he skewed the data set, right? And so what you want to do is you want to take those heavy outliers out of most of your data sets. Trim means will do that for you. You may or may not want to do this, but you have that option. Excel will tell you these things. We're not going to use Excel much in this class, but know that Excel will give you those measures. And that, a lot of times you'll have measures that don't match each other, right? And so this is not unusual to have three values that are far apart. This is problematic in a data set, and so you need to kind of begin to talk about this. But what we want to do is, particularly for the mean and the median, we want to talk about whether they're close together or whether they're far apart. And that's going to tell us something about the shape of the data. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. And I'll wrap it up in the fourth video on how to think about that. Remember that your means can be affected by the outliers. Medians are always the middle value. And describing the middle, whether it's close together, whether it's far apart, becomes important. And so, just to give you a sense of this, if you look at this graph, it looks at the median retirement accounts for savings for families. This is the median, right? And so medians for different amounts. So that would be the median, and it's often a good example. But this one uses both means and medians. And here's the thing: if you look at the median, the middle value is lower. The upper value, which is the blue line, which is the mean, is much higher. And here's the thing: is that there are people who have really high levels of retirement accounts, right? And so what they're doing is they're skewing the data upwards. And so there's nothing wrong with the skew, but you need to be able to recognize it, and you need to be able to recognize when that happens. We'll talk about how you can recognize that in the data sets that you're working with. After you've found the middle of the data set, you need to kind of say, okay, I've got the middle here. How does it spread across the distribution? What does it look like? And so what I want you to be able to do are two things. Talk about the spread, and then also talk about the shape of the data. And I'm going to give you some tools here, and we'll talk about in the fourth video how to put those together. You want to report the range of the data, the high and the low. Report the distance between the high and the low, which is the range. This is a really simple measure of variability. Obviously, like means, it's sensitive to outliers, high and low values, but it does give you a sense about what the high and low values actually are. Now, standard deviation and variance. You will use variance in a later assignment, but standard deviations tell me a lot about the data set. If I teach a class in person, what happens is I will ask someone who's had stats before, so tell me what a standard deviation is. And it's a parlor trick because most of my students can't do that at that point. What they learned it from a mathematician who said this is the standard deviation and it deviates. What standard deviation tells you is this: if I have the middle of the data set, how does the data spread? What does it look like along that spread? And one of the things is, when you get good at analytics, someone could tell you what the mean and the standard deviation and the skew is, and you can actually picture the data set in your head. Now, that's not a requirement for this class, but I want you to know that that's how powerful actually this particular measurement can work. Like I said, I haven't calculated these by hand since the 1980s, but there are the formulas if you ever want to do that yourself. What I want you to think about is, that a standard deviation is really what it says. The deviation, you can think about spread, okay? So if I said I have the middle here, one standard deviation is an actual unit. It's an actual measurement that has some meaning about how that spreads out. Two standard deviations does the same thing. And so when we talk about those are real measurements, real distances from the middle. And so we'll use that in some real ways. Variance we're not going to deal with much in descriptive statistics, simply just report it. Variance is the standard deviation squared. Standard deviation is the variance, is the square root of the variance. There's a relationship there. One of the things is that we'll use this when we talk about analysis of variance later on. Excel has these functions. If you use Excel, these work really well. Use them. I use them a lot when I'm working in Excel. So later on, we're going to talk about how to use these, how to look smart in a board meeting, which is always one of my favorite pieces, you don't need to be as geeky as me. That's ending this part. I'm going to talk about data visualization next.